There's a version of Texas Hold'em that most players never reach. It's not about the cards you're dealt. It's about what you do with everything else. It rewards discipline. It rewards adaptability. And it asks for something most players aren't prepared to give. The world of Texas Hold'em is rich with psychological layers. Every decision is shaped by subtle cues, shifting positions, and the actions of those around you. Even the smallest detail can hold significance. In this game, awareness is power. But awareness is just the beginning. As we delve deeper, we'll explore the strategic pillars that define mastery: bankroll management, probability, technology, bluffing, table image, variance, and the nuances of online play. Poker is not simply a contest of cards, but a test of perception and resilience. The strongest players learn to read situations with care. They understand when to act with confidence and when to wait. Each hand is a new opportunity to apply what you know and notice something you didn't before. Emotions can rise and fall, but composure is the foundation of enduring success. In the quiet moments between hands, the mind has time to reflect. These pauses are as important as the action itself. They allow for adjustment, for gathering insight, and for maintaining balance. With each breath, you become more attuned to the rhythm of the game. The environment may change, but the principles of sound play remain steady. Over time, the pieces connect. You'll start to see how position shapes every decision. How reading an opponent's pattern can be worth more than any single hand. How managing your emotions and your bankroll are just as important as knowing your odds. This series moves through all of it, from the mental foundations to the mathematics, from bluffing to variance, from live tables to online play. Now let your mind drift into a calm, observant state. There is no need to rush. The journey through the depths of Texas Hold'em is patient and methodical. Each insight builds upon the last, forming a foundation of understanding and skill. Rest in the assurance that with every moment of attention, you are developing a sharper edge. As the pace slows, allow this time to become a gentle meditation on the enduring fundamentals of the game. Chapter 1: The Mental Game Reset. A clear mind is the foundation everything else is built on. Focus on this hand, this moment, and the information in front of you. Avoid dwelling on hands lost last session, or worrying about the money you might win or lose by the end of the night. With a clear mind, stack sizes, positions, and table dynamics become more noticeable. Decisions are no longer made out of habit or on autopilot. Mental clarity helps you see what's really happening, allowing you to respond in the best way possible. Many experienced players point to mental clarity as a key difference between steady decision-making and costly errors. Distractions such as life stress or fatigue can influence your decisions. Missing a detail about someone's stack size or forgetting who's acting behind you can lead to mistakes. Players who take the time to clear their mind before playing tend to make more consistent decisions across many hands and sessions. The mental game is not just about being calm. Training yourself to focus on the details that matter and letting go of the noise around you is crucial. Some players find it helpful to take a few deep breaths before a session, or to check in with themselves about what they're feeling. With practice, entering that focused state becomes easier. Processing new information faster becomes second nature. When the table changes or a new player sits down, adapting quickly becomes possible. Mental clarity is not something you're born with. It's a skill you can build, just like any other part of your game. Even with focus, poker brings swings. Days will come when you lose pots you thought you should win, or stretches where nothing seems to go right. Psychological resilience becomes essential. Resilience is your ability to keep making logical decisions after a tough loss or a bad run. In No Limit Texas Hold'em, even the best players experience downswings. It's just part of the game. What matters is how you respond to those moments. Losing a big pot might bring feelings of frustration or disappointment. These feelings are normal. The important thing is not to let them control your next decision. Resilient players accept that variance is built into poker. A single bad beat does not mean poor play. Instead of replaying the last hand over and over, attention is brought back to the current hand and information. This mindset helps avoid emotional decisions that can hurt the bankroll in the long run. Building resilience can be achieved by setting aside time after sessions to review hands in a calm setting. Away from the table, you can look at what happened without the heat of the moment. Learning from mistakes, spotting patterns, and preparing for the next session becomes possible. Over time, this habit helps separate emotions from decisions. Recovering from losses and keeping focus on strategy, not on the outcome of a single hand, becomes easier. Alongside resilience, emotional control is another core skill for profitable poker. Emotional control means feeling frustration, excitement, or even fear without letting those emotions dictate actions. Everyone feels something when they play. Handling it is what matters. If anger or excitement drives your bets, rash decisions are more likely. This state is called tilt, where emotions take over and rational thinking breaks down. Tilt often shows up as wild betting, careless calls, and sudden swings in your bankroll. Stress is a common trigger for tilt. Losing a big pot or feeling tired after a long session can build stress, making it harder to think clearly. Many players use simple techniques to manage their emotions. Controlled breathing is one of the easiest ways to calm yourself. Taking a few slow breaths between hands can lower stress and provide a moment to reset. Some players like to pause briefly after a tough hand, allowing their mind to settle before acting again. Mindfulness is another tool available. When mindful, you notice what you're feeling without acting on every emotion. Noticing your heart rate picking up or thoughts racing is a sign to slow down and focus on the facts. Pre-session routines can also help. Taking a walk, listening to music, or sitting quietly for a few minutes before playing can make it easier to enter each session with a steady mindset. The key to emotional control is catching yourself early. Noticing the start of tilt allows you to step back before it worsens. A break might be needed, or a reminder that one hand does not define your session. With practice, staying calm even when things get tough becomes achievable. This steadiness tends to produce more consistent betting patterns and fewer big swings driven by impulse. Poker is a mental discipline. Just like studying strategy and reviewing hands, training your mind is essential. Mental clarity, resilience, and emotional control are not one-time achievements. They're skills built by paying attention, practicing, and preparing before every session. Committing to this mental foundation prepares you to approach the deeper strategic parts of the game with confidence. Each time you sit down to play, let your preparation guide you. Let your focus grow. Real improvement starts here. Chapter 2. Reading your opponents. Some players act before the action even reaches them. Others go quiet when they're strong. These aren't accidents. They're the small repeated behaviors that tell you more about a hand than the cards themselves. In No Limit Texas Hold'em, you'll notice that some players act quickly while others pause. Some bet boldly, others hesitate, or call more often than they raise. These are not just random quirks. Over time, each opponent develops their own patterns and tendencies. The way someone bets, checks, or even folds can tell you a lot about how they view the hand and what they might be holding. You're not just looking for obvious tells or dramatic gestures. Most of the valuable information comes from the subtle ways people approach each hand. For example, you might see a player who only bets big when they have a strong hand and checks when they're unsure. Others might bluff more often or play a wide range of hands from every position. These tendencies become clearer with continued observation, especially if you pay attention across many hands and sessions. Careful observation helps you pick up on behaviors that most players miss. When you start to recognize these tendencies, you gain a real edge. You're no longer guessing blindly about what your opponent has. Instead, you're using real evidence from their past behavior to estimate the likelihood that they're strong or weak. This helps you decide whether it's better to fold, call, or raise in a given spot. Being able to interpret these behaviors accurately is a core part of advanced poker. It lets you move beyond playing your own cards and start making decisions based on the broader dynamics of the table. Developing this skill takes time and attention, but it's crucial for making strategic decisions that improve your results. One of the clearest ways to learn about your opponents is by studying their betting tendencies. Every action at the table creates a trail of information. Whether someone bets, calls, raises, checks, folds, or moves all in, each choice adds to the picture. By tracking the sequence and size of these actions, you start to see which players are more aggressive, which ones are cautious, and which tend to play only strong hands. Over time, you'll notice that certain patterns often match up with specific types of hands or strategies. For example, you might see a player who tends to raise pre-flop and then bets big on the flop when they have a strong hand. If they suddenly check or bet small, that could signal a weaker holding or a different plan. Another player might call frequently, hoping to see more cards with speculative hands, but rarely raises unless they feel confident about their holding. These tendencies matter because they help you narrow down what your opponent is likely to have at each stage of the hand. It's important to remember that betting tendencies only make sense when you consider the context. Stack sizes, table position, and the flow of previous hands all play a role. A player might bet big because they're short-stacked, not because they're strong. Or they might call more often in late position than early. Consistency is key. Look for repeated behaviors, not just one-off actions. When you see a player act in a way that matches their usual pattern, you can be more confident in your read. When they break their pattern, that can be a signal worth paying attention to. Mastering this process takes patience. Practicing tracking and analyzing betting behaviors enhances your ability to predict what your opponents are likely to do next. This tends to lead to more informed decisions, and over time can contribute to a better win rate. Building strong observational skills is a practical process. You don't have to watch everything at once. Start by picking one or two specific cues to focus on. For example, pay attention to how quickly a player acts when it's their turn, or watch for physical cues like someone reaching for their chips before the action gets to them. Sometimes the way an opponent sits up straighter, glances at their stack, or avoids eye contact can be just as telling as the bets they make. Maintaining attention throughout each hand and session is crucial. It's easy to get distracted, especially in long games, but the best reads come from staying engaged. Taking a brief mental break between hands is fine. Just try not to disengage completely. This helps you stay sharp without losing track of important details. Keeping notes or mental tallies about each player's tendencies can also help reinforce what you observe. You might jot down that a certain player likes to check-raise the turn, or that another seems uncomfortable when holding a marginal hand. Over time, these little notes add up and help you spot tendencies more quickly. As you practice these techniques, you'll find it easier to anticipate what your opponents might do next. You'll start to see connections between their actions and the hands they're likely to play. This kind of focus not only helps you make better decisions in each hand, but it also builds your confidence and presence at the table. Every session gives you a chance to refine these skills. Observing consistently reveals more about your opponents. As you become adept at reading them, you gain greater control over your decisions and your results. Let these habits settle in and shape the way you see the game. Each observation brings you closer to understanding not just the cards, but the people playing them. Chapter 3: Leveraging Position. Where you sit at the table is not just a detail. It determines when you act, how much you know before you decide, and how much pressure you can apply or absorb. The button moves one seat to the left every hand, and with it, your place in the order shifts too. Some seats give you more information. Others leave you guessing. Early position includes the first few seats to act before the flop. This typically covers under the gun, and often one or two more seats to that player's left. When you are in early position, you have to act before most of the table. That means you have less information to work with. You do not know yet who will call, raise, or fold behind you. Because of this, early position tends to be one of the tougher spots at the table. You face the entire remaining field and rarely get to close the action. Most strong players tighten up their starting hand selection here. They play only hands that can handle pressure, because they know they will often be out of position for the rest of the hand. Middle position covers the seats that act after early position, but before the cutoff and the button. In these seats you have a bit more information, but you still face several players left to act behind you. Middle position is a kind of transition zone. You can open up your hand selection a little, but you still need to be careful. There are still players behind you who could wake up with strong hands, or use their position to put you in tough spots. Late position means the cutoff and the button. These are the last two seats to act pre-flop, and usually the last to act on later streets. These spots are powerful in no-limit Texas Hold'em. Acting last gives you the chance to see how almost everyone else responds before you make your own decision. You get to gather more information about bet sizes, timing, and opponents' willingness to continue. Over time, late position tends to produce the most favorable results of any seat group. You get more chances to steal pots, control pot size, and play a wider variety of hands. Absolute position and relative position both shape how you approach a hand. Knowing your fixed seat relative to the button tells you when you act on every street. But your order of action against one specific opponent can matter just as much. Even without the button, acting after a key player gives you information you can use. The core advantage of acting later is that you get to see what others do before you commit chips. This extra information often lets you make more profitable decisions. It is why strong players pay so much attention to position, and why you should always know where you stand relative to the button and the action. Advanced players do not just know their position. They use it to shape their entire betting strategy. In early position, they play tight, aware that they will have to act first on later streets. They choose hands that can stand up to pressure and are less likely to cause trouble post-flop. In late position, they open up their range, including more speculative and marginal hands, because they can act after most opponents and gather more information before deciding how to continue. When advanced players are in late position, they often play more aggressively. They look for spots to raise, re-raise, or apply pressure, recognizing that opponents in the blinds or early seats have already shown some weakness by not raising. Acting last lets them size their bets to put pressure where it counts, especially against shorter stacks or capped ranges in the blinds. Out of position, meaning when they have to act before their opponents, strong players tend to play more conservatively. They check more often, especially with marginal hands. They try to control the size of the pot and avoid getting trapped in difficult spots. In position, they take more aggressive lines, both for value and as bluffs, because they can see how their opponents react and adjust accordingly. On the button, advanced players widen their calling and three-betting ranges. They know that being last to act post-flop lets them realize their equity more effectively. In the blinds, they defend differently. The big blind can defend wider due to better pot odds, but both blind positions are tough because you will almost always play the rest of the hand out of position. This makes post-flop play more challenging and often less profitable. Great players design their pre-flop strategies so that their strongest and most flexible ranges appear in late position. This reflects the long-term value of acting last. Over many sessions, the button and cutoff tend to produce the most favorable results, while the blinds and early seats are the hardest to win from. Position does not exist in a vacuum. The best players combine positional awareness with other key factors, like stack size and opponent tendencies. When stacks are deep, position tends to become more valuable. There are more streets where meaningful chip movement can occur, so acting last gives you more control and more chances to make favorable decisions. With shallow stacks, position often matters less, because a larger share of the chips tend to go in quickly, and there's less room to maneuver. In tournaments, stack depth and position work together to shape which hands you can play. Deeper stacks and late position let you play a wider range. When stacks are short, you have to tighten up, even in good seats. Opponent tendencies also matter. If you have loose or passive players in the blinds, you can open more hands from late position, knowing they are more likely to call and play passively. If tough or aggressive players are behind you, you might tighten up and play fewer hands, since you expect more resistance. Position also helps you choose pot size. With strong hands, you can allow the pot to grow when you have position. With medium strength, you might keep the pot small, especially if you are out of position and want to avoid tough decisions. Having position on an aggressive opponent is a meaningful edge. You get to see what they do before you commit. That lets you trap when you're strong, keep the pot small when you're not, or fold with more confidence when the situation calls for it. Before you act on any hand, take a moment to know where you stand. Let that awareness shape your choices. The more you build this habit, the more you'll notice how quietly it shifts your results over time. Position won't announce itself. It just works. Chapter 4: Balancing Aggression and Caution. Every action you take at the table sends a signal. Whether you bet, raise, check or call, you're telling a story about your hand. Aggression is a central part of the game's strategy, and it means more than just playing a lot of hands. In poker, aggression is about being proactive. That usually means betting and raising, not just checking or calling. When you take the lead in the betting, you're said to have the initiative. This puts you in control of the hand's direction and often makes your opponents react to you, not the other way around. Playing assertively does more than just build bigger pots. It can unsettle opponents, especially those who are less experienced or uncomfortable facing pressure. When you bet or raise, you're forcing others to make choices. Many times, your opponents will have uncertain or weak hands and will fold rather than risk more chips. This means that across many hands, assertive players tend to win a meaningful number of pots without ever having to show their cards. This isn't just luck. It's the result of putting others in tough spots, where they're likely to make mistakes, such as folding hands that might be best, or calling with hands that can't stand up to pressure. This approach also lets you take advantage of situations where your opponents are too passive. If you sense that others are waiting for strong hands before they act, you can pick up small pots by betting and raising. Across many sessions, this builds both your chip stack and your image as a player who drives the action. Players who use well-timed assertiveness often find themselves shaping the pace of the table. They decide when pots get big and when the action slows down. This sense of control is one of the main rewards of playing with initiative. But just as assertiveness can be powerful, caution has its own place in the game. Caution means holding back when you sense risk or uncertainty. It's not the same as playing scared. Instead, it's about knowing when to check, call, or fold instead of building a bigger pot. Skilled players use caution to preserve their chips and avoid unnecessary losses, especially when the situation is unclear or their hand strength is uncertain. There are times in every session when caution is the better choice. If you're facing resistance from an opponent who keeps betting into you, or you have a hand that's not strong enough to withstand a lot of pressure, taking a step back can save you from bigger losses. Folding marginal hands or checking instead of betting helps you avoid getting trapped in pots where you're outmatched. Across hundreds of hands, these small acts of restraint can make a big difference in your results. Too much assertiveness tends to backfire, especially when you push hard regardless of the situation. If you build big pots with weak hands, you risk running into stronger holdings and losing more than you should. Opponents who pay attention will notice when you're consistently betting and raising. They may start to trap you by calling with strong hands or setting you up for costly mistakes. That's why caution is just as important as assertiveness. It protects you from becoming predictable and keeps your losses in check when the odds are against you. The best players know that poker demands a balance between these two approaches. Deciding when to be assertive and when to be cautious isn't automatic. It depends on a mix of factors that change from hand to hand. Your position at the table is crucial, as covered in Chapter 3. Acting later in the betting round gives you more information and makes assertiveness safer. In early position, you often need to be more careful, since others have yet to act and may wake up with strong hands. Another key factor is the size of your stack compared to the rest of the table. When you have a deep stack, you can afford to take more risks and apply pressure in spots where a short stack might need to play tighter. But deeper stacks also mean bigger potential losses, so you need to judge when assertiveness is worth the risk. If you're short-stacked, caution can help you preserve your chips for better opportunities. Your opponent's tendencies matter too. Some players fold too much when facing bets. Against them, assertiveness pays off more often. Others call down with weak hands or look for chances to trap assertive players. In those games, you need to mix in more caution and avoid bluffing into players who never fold. Watching how often others enter pots or go to showdown helps you fine-tune your own approach. The board itself changes things as well. A dry board with few draws tends to reward assertive betting, since your opponents often can't continue without a strong hand. Wet boards with many possible draws or combinations can make assertiveness riskier, since more hands can call or raise you. As the community cards come out, reassess whether assertiveness or caution fits your hand and the situation. Table dynamics shift constantly. New players join and others leave. The mood can move from tight to loose in just a few orbits. You'll get the most out of your game by paying attention and adjusting as these changes happen. Sometimes you'll need to pull back and play more cautiously if the table gets assertive. Other times, you'll see opportunities to ramp up your own assertiveness when the table tightens up. Balancing assertiveness and caution is not a skill you master in a single session. It takes experience and observation. Each hand is a new puzzle. The right mix changes as you gather more information. Stay open to those shifts. Let your decisions come from what you actually see, not from what you're hoping for. That flexible approach is what keeps your strategy from going stale. The more you practice reading those moments, the more naturally the right choice tends to surface. Chapter 5: Advanced Bluffing Techniques. When you start thinking about advanced bluffing, you need to shift your focus from just your own hand to the people sitting across from you. Strong players tend not to look for any chance to bluff. They look for the right people and the right moments. This all starts by closely observing how your opponents bet and behave. In live no-limit Texas Hold'em games, you will notice certain tendencies if you watch closely. Some players bet quickly and small after the flop, when they want to win the pot without a fight. Others show early aggression, but then slow down on the turn, which often means their hand is not as strong as it first appeared. When you see someone continuation bet the flop and then check the turn, it usually signals a weaker range. Physical tells can also add useful clues, but you have to treat them carefully. A player who stares at the board or their chips during a big pot is often feeling some kind of pressure. When someone becomes unusually still, facing a large bet, they might be holding a strong hand, or they might simply be nervous. That cue alone doesn't tell you much. It becomes more useful when you combine it with what you already know about their betting behaviors. You'll also notice players glancing at their stack when they're considering a call or raise that would commit a large portion of their chips. These small signals add up over time. Patience is key here. Do not rush to act on the first tell you. Notice. Instead, gather information over several hands. Look for shifts in behavior. If a player who is usually cautious suddenly bets quickly in a big pot, that could mean they are trying to steal it. When you see someone check call multiple streets, they often have a medium-strength hand or are just trying to get to showdown cheaply. Someone who tanks for a long time before calling a big bet is more often uncertain than trapping with a very strong hand. The more you track these tendencies, the easier it becomes to recognize when a bluff is worth attempting. You should also observe bet sizing. Players who keep their bet sizes similar for both strong hands and bluffs are tougher to read. If you see someone change their sizing only when they are strong or weak, that is a valuable clue. All of this takes discipline. Focus on the subtle cues and avoid relying on one obvious tell. Over time, you will develop a sense for when an opponent is vulnerable to a bluff and when they are not. Bluffing at a high level is not just about the cards or the reads, it is about psychology. Your table image is the story you tell through your actions. Other players build a picture of you based on how loose or tight you play, how aggressive you are, and how you handle big pots. If you've shown down strong hands after betting aggressively, opponents are more likely to give you credit and consider folding when you make another big bet. If you have been caught bluffing or shown wild hands, you may get called down lighter. Confidence matters too. The way you move your chips and handle your bets can influence how others see you. In live games, opponents often hesitate to challenge someone who bets with visible confidence. Still, more experienced players sometimes see deliberate confidence as a sign of weakness, so you want to keep things natural. Try to keep your emotional state steady. If you tend to react the same way whether you win or lose, observant opponents are more likely to see you as composed. This makes your bluffs less likely to look like a tilt play. Timing is another factor. You want to pick your moments. The time you choose to bluff can be just as important as the size of your bet. For example, in tournaments, players care more about survival near big pay jumps, so a bluff at that time can have extra weight. In cash games, if you have just lost a big pot and suddenly become more aggressive, observant players may read that as frustration. The time you take before betting is also noticed. Both very quick and very slow bets can make people suspicious, so try to keep your tempo consistent. Sometimes, showing a well-timed bluff at showdown will change how the table sees you for the next few orbits, making it easier to get paid on your strong hands or to pull off another bluff later. Reading opponents and managing your image sets the foundation. The tactics themselves build on top of that. The semi-bluff works best on the flop or turn, while cards are still to come. You're putting pressure on your opponent while keeping a path to winning at showdown if they call. That combination of pressure and equity is what makes it so useful in the right situation. Semi-bluffs tend to work best against players who are willing to lay down medium-strength hands when facing pressure. The overbout is another tool worth understanding in depth. This tactic can be powerful because it puts your opponent in a difficult position. In live games, many experienced players tend to read river over bets as representing either a very strong hand or a bluff with little showdown value. If the board allows you to credibly represent several strong value hands, an overbet can be especially effective. In tournaments, you will sometimes see large turnover bets when the stacks are deep enough to threaten an all-in shove on the river. These moves put maximum pressure on your opponents and can cause even strong hands to fold. When you use these advanced bluffs, you need to think about your opponent's behaviors. Observant players will notice if you only overbet with the nuts or only semi-bluff with draws. That is why it is important to balance your range. By mixing strong hands and semi-bluffs in your aggressive lines, you make yourself harder to exploit. Setting up a bluff is about more than just one bet. You can manipulate the pot size and your perceived hand strength to make your story believable. Sometimes building a pot early with a mix of value bets and bluffs will set the stage for a big bluff later. Other times you might keep the pot small until you recognize a moment when your opponent's range is capped, and then apply maximum pressure. Advanced bluffing is a skill that grows with experience. Each hand gives you a chance to notice something new and adjust what you already know. The more you track these tendencies and psychological cues, the more tools you have to pull off bluffs at just the right time. Let yourself slow down and focus on the details. This is where the edge begins to show. Chapter 6: Exploiting Patterns and Predictability. Most players have habits they fall back on without realizing it. The longer you sit with someone, the more those habits start to surface. Many players develop habits they return to, particularly when they feel settled or when the pressure builds. These habits show up in how they size their bets, how quickly they act, and even which positions they choose to play from. If you really pay attention, you will start to spot these repeated actions. Say you notice someone acts quickly when they hold a strong hand but takes longer when they are unsure. That timing pattern can be a clue. Or you might see a player who tends to use the same bet size when betting for value, but reaches for a smaller bet when bluffing. Over time, these patterns add up. You can also track who tends to limp into pots, who folds under pressure after calling pre-flop, and who only reaches showdown with strong hands. Another common pattern is how often someone enters pots from early or late position. Some players are much looser in late position, so you can expect a wider range of hands from them there. Others stick to playing only premium hands, no matter where they sit. Showdown tendencies are also revealing. If a player only takes hands to showdown when they are very strong, you can adjust your play against them in future pots. To keep track of these patterns, you do not need anything fancy. Mental notes are often enough. You might remind yourself that one player tends to bet big with strong hands, or that another folds when the pressure comes after calling pre-flop. Over time, these notes build a profile. The more you observe, the more you will see that many players turn out to be less unpredictable than they first appear. This kind of careful tracking gives you an informational advantage. You'll have a clearer sense of what to expect from certain players, and that kind of edge can translate into profit over time. Once you have spotted a pattern, the next step is to find ways to exploit it. Spotting someone who folds too often to continuation bets after calling pre-flop allows you to bet more frequently in those spots. If you see that a player only shows aggression with very strong hands, you can apply more pressure when they check or call. These adjustments let you take advantage of their habits. Bet sizing is another tool. When someone calls too often, you can value bet bigger with your strong hands. When they fold too much, you can bluff more frequently. Noticing that a player continuation bets almost every flop means you can plan to call or raise more often with hands that play well against their likely range. Act on what you have seen, not just what you hope will work. Timing can matter too. Some players act quickly when they are weak and take longer when they are strong, or the other way around. If you pick up on this, you can choose your moments to enter pots or ramp up the pressure when their timing suggests weakness. In tournament play, you'll sometimes see someone tighten up near pay jumps. That can be a spot where more aggression pays off, because they're less willing to risk their stack. One thing to remember is not to overdo it. If you exploit a pattern too aggressively, a sharp opponent is more likely to catch on and adjust. Subtlety is important. Use these adjustments when the spot is right, but do not make your own actions too obvious. The goal is to create profitable situations without alerting your opponents to what you are doing. While it is valuable to spot and exploit patterns, it is just as important to avoid becoming predictable yourself. If you tend to use the same lines or bet sizes with the same types of hands, attentive players will start to figure you out. The solution is adaptability. Mix up your play so opponents cannot draw easy conclusions from your past actions. That might mean continuation betting on one hand, checking on the next, or taking a passive line in a spot where you'd normally bet, even when the situations look similar. Change your bet sizes occasionally, not just based on your hand, but to keep people guessing. If you've been playing tight for a stretch, try loosening up for a few orbits before tightening back down. By varying your overall style, you make it much harder for opponents to pin down what you are doing. Being adaptable also means reviewing your own patterns. Ask yourself how your actions might look from across the table. If you notice you always take the same approach in certain spots, try breaking that habit. Avoid relying on automatic moves, like continuation betting, every flop regardless of the situation. The more you shift your tactics, the less likely you are to be exploited. Unpredictability puts pressure on your opponents. When they're not sure what you'll do next, they're more likely to make mistakes or default to passive lines. That uncertainty works in your favor. Keep making observation a habit as you play. The more patient you are with the details, the more clearly the patterns emerge. Stay flexible with your own strategy. The players who adapt the most quietly are usually the hardest to read. That steady attention compounds over time. Chapter 7: The Art of Folding. Every chip you keep is a chip you can use later. That idea sounds simple, but it changes how you see one of the most common actions in poker. Letting go of a hand is not a retreat. It is a deliberate choice to protect your resources for a better spot. In no-limit Texas Hold'em, every hand you play is just one decision in a much larger game. Professional players see folding as a tool for managing risk and controlling their losses. They focus on sustained results, not the outcome of each individual hand. It is common for less experienced players to see folding as a kind of defeat. Ego can get involved. You might worry that others think you are being outplayed. Sometimes you fear missing out on a big pot, especially in live games where the action is in front of you. These feelings are normal, but strong players learn to set them aside. Professionals detach from the outcome of any single hand. They fold when the math or the situation is not in their favor, even if it means letting go of a hand that looks decent on the surface. In the long run, this approach tends to produce more stable results and can reduce the size of your swings. You will notice that even strong hands get folded by skilled players when the betting action turns against them. If the board gets dangerous or an opponent suddenly shows a lot of strength, it is often better to release your hand than to get trapped in a big pot with low odds of winning. Folding is not a passive move. It is an active choice to step away from spots where you are likely behind or vulnerable to being outdrawn. By folding in these situations, you keep your losses under control and save your chips for better opportunities. This is a core reason why folding is one of the main tools for steady profitability in both live and online cash games. The most profitable folds often happen when you weigh all the relevant information and realize that calling or raising would be worse than letting go. Pot odds are a key factor here. When the odds the pot is offering are much worse than your actual chance of winning, folding is usually the right move. This is especially true when you face large bets or raises, or when the board is coordinated in a way that makes it easy for opponents to have strong hands. Reading your opponents is another important part of knowing when to fold. If you have been watching the betting patterns and notice that a player who is usually passive suddenly becomes aggressive, that can often indicate a stronger range than usual. Timing tells, bet sizing, and subtle changes in behavior can all point toward a stronger range. When these signals point to a strong range, folding even a hand you like can save you from a bigger loss. Position matters too. Being out of position makes every decision harder. You have to act before your opponents, which means you have less information and less control over the pot size. In these spots, hands that might be playable in position often become folds. Folding weak or dominated hands from early position is a common way for strong players to avoid playing big pots at a disadvantage. In tournaments, stack size adds another layer. When you have fewer chips, the cost of a mistake is higher. Folding marginal hands becomes more important as a way to protect what you have left for stronger spots. Across many sessions, folding in marginal situations where your opponents show a lot of strength helps reduce variance. It protects you from the big downswings that come from calling too often in bad spots. This discipline is a big part of why professional players are able to maintain steady results over the long run. It helps to reframe how you think about folding. Instead of seeing it as a loss, try to see each fold as an investment in your future hands. Every chip you do not put into a losing pot is a chip you can use later when you have a clearer edge. Calling in a spot where you are likely behind does not just cost you those chips. It also reduces your ability to make stronger plays when a better spot arrives. Sometimes it is tough to fold and then see cards come that would have given you the winning hand. That feeling of frustration or regret is common, but it is important to keep your focus on the quality of your decision, not the outcome of a single hand. Players who respect the value of their remaining stack often find it easier to stay composed and make clearer decisions, especially during difficult stretches. In both cash games and tournaments, treating folding as a strategic retreat instead of a personal failure helps you tighten up your pre-flop and post-flop ranges. It makes it easier to let go of hands that are not worth fighting for. The ability to fold strong but vulnerable hands without emotional turmoil is a clear sign of experience. Each disciplined fold is a step towards steady profitability, even when one or two of those hands would have hit by chance. When you start to see each fold as a deliberate move rather than a missed chance, something shifts. The frustration fades. The decisions get cleaner. And the chips you protect today are the ones that give you options tomorrow. Chapter 8: Value Betting. Extracting maximum value. Getting called when you are ahead is where most of your profit actually comes from. Not from bluffs, not from fancy plays, but from the simple act of betting your strong hands and watching weaker ones call. When you value bet, you are betting or raising with the goal of being called by worse hands. This is different from bluffing, where the goal is to make better hands fold. With value betting, you want your opponent to call because you believe your hand is ahead of what they can have. The more often you get called by weaker holdings, the more chips you win over time. To succeed with value betting, you need to judge whether your hand is likely the best at this moment. That means thinking about the board, your opponent's likely range, and how the action has unfolded. If your hand beats most of the hands your opponent will call with, it is a good spot to value bet. For example, if you have a strong top pair, or better, and you expect your opponent to call with many weaker pairs, you are often missing value if you check. It is also important to see that value betting is not just about having the best hand. The key is getting called by worse. If you bet, and only better hands call, you are not value betting. You are turning your hand into a bluff by accident. That is why it helps to think carefully about what hands your opponent will continue with. Some players call too often with marginal hands. Others are quick to fold anything weak. Your read on their tendencies makes a big difference in how much value you can extract. A large portion of your long-term profit tends to come from betting your strongest hands well. Bluffs can add to your results, but the chips you tend to win by getting called when you are ahead are often what builds your bankroll over time. If you get good at spotting these spots and betting for value, you will see your results improve steadily. Another part of value betting is knowing when not to do it. If you are not sure your hand is ahead of your opponent's calling range, it is safer to check and keep the pot smaller. The risk with thin bets is that you might get called by better hands more often than you expect. Being honest about your hand's strength and your opponent's habits will help you avoid these mistakes. The timing of your bets makes a big difference. In No Limit Texas Hold'em, you have the chance to bet on the flop, turn, and river. Sometimes it is best to start building the pot right away. Other times you might wait until the turn or river, when your hand is stronger or the board is more favorable. The right street to bet is the one where you are most likely to get called by worse. If your opponent likes to chase draws, you might bet earlier. If they call less on early streets, but are sticky on the river, you might wait to bet big there. Bet sizing is just as important as timing. You want to choose a size that builds the pot with your strong hand, but not so big that only better hands can call. Against players who call with many weak hands, you can bet larger. Against players who are cautious and fold often, you might want to bet smaller to keep them in with worse hands. On dry boards, where there are not many draws, you can often size up your bets because your range is stronger and there are fewer hands that can improve. On wet boards, where there are many possible draws, you might size your bets to target both weaker made hands and draws that will call. Your previous actions shape how opponents respond to your bets. If you have been betting aggressively, some players will call you lighter. Others will tighten up. How your image sits in their mind at that moment affects how much you can realistically expect to collect. It helps to track how often a particular opponent calls river bets with marginal hands. If someone pays off big bets with weak pairs, you can size up against them. If someone only calls with very strong hands, keeping your bets thinner is the safer approach. The type of opponent in front of you changes everything. Against a tight and cautious opponent, you cannot expect calls with weak hands very often. To get value from these players, your hand needs to look strong even by their standards. Otherwise they will fold, and you will not get paid. In these spots, focus on betting with your best hands and avoid forcing thin spots. Loose and call-happy players are the opposite. They call with all sorts of hands, even when they are clearly behind. These are the players you want to target with frequent and larger bets. If you have a strong hand, betting big is often the right move. They will pay you off with weak pairs, draws, and sometimes even high card alone. Over time, those bets tend to add up to meaningful profit. Some players are aggressive and like to bluff. They might call river bets more often than they should, especially if they think you are bluffing them. Against these players, well-timed bets can work well, but be careful not to get trapped if they are capable of raising with strong hands. You want to balance your bets with some caution, but do not shy away from betting when you have a real hand. Short-stacked players present another spot for value. When their stack is small compared to the pot, they cannot fold as easily, even with medium-strength hands. If you have a strong made hand and the pot is already large, you can often bet with confidence, knowing they are committed to calling with a wide range. In online games, the character of a table can shift quickly. If you find yourself at a table with several loose callers, multi-way pots become more common. In these situations, strong hands can be bet against multiple weaker ranges at once. With more players in the pot, the chance that someone holds a strong hand goes up. It is worth keeping your standards a bit higher when betting in big multi-way pots. How your opponents read your tendencies will shift throughout a session. If you have been active and winning pots, expect more calls. If you have been quiet, your bets carry more weight and may get less action. Adjusting your sizing to match how you are currently perceived is part of getting full value. Betting for value is not a fixed formula. It is a skill you keep refining as you watch your opponents, the board, and your own image change. Each hand gives you new information about how much you can get and where the opportunity sits. When you notice those shifts, you give yourself more chances to get paid. Slow down in those spots. Watch how your bets land and how players respond. That attention, built hand by hand, is what separates players who collect value from those who leave it behind. Chapter 9: Adjusting to Table Dynamics. Every table has its own rhythm. That rhythm is shaped by the people playing, how they bet, and how they react to wins and losses. It is not just about one opponent or one hand. It is the collective behavior of everyone at the table, and it can shift from hour to hour, or even hand to hand. It is not just about one opponent or one hand. It is the collective behavior of everyone at the table, and it can shift from hour to hour, or even hand to hand. Sometimes a table feels slow and cautious. Other times, it feels wild and unpredictable. These changes are not random. They often happen when new players join, when short stacks leave, or when someone starts winning or losing several pots in a row. Each shift can affect how many people see flops, how big the pots get, and how often players bet or raise. Paying attention reveals that a table with mostly tight players tends to move slowly, with fewer big pots and less action. In contrast, when loose players dominate the table, the game speeds up and pots get bigger. It is not just the number of hands played. The way people bet and react to each other changes the whole feel of the game. You need to keep watching for these shifts. Every time a hand goes to showdown, you pick up clues about how players are thinking. When you see a player suddenly get more aggressive, or when someone starts folding more often, that is a sign the table dynamic might be changing. Ignoring these changes risks making decisions that do not fit the current game. Over time, that kind of mismatch tends to cost you. Staying aware of the table mood is not just good practice. It tends to be one of the more reliable ways to keep your decisions in line with what is actually happening around you. A big part of understanding table dynamics is recognizing player styles. Most players fall into one or more common archetypes. Aggressive players like to bet and raise a lot, building bigger pots and putting pressure on everyone else. In contrast, passive players call and check much more often than they bet or raise, keeping the pots smaller and the action a bit safer for them. Some players are tight. They wait for strong starting hands and do not get involved very often. Others are loose and will play almost anything, showing up in many pots. The mix of these styles shapes the pace and feel of the game. At a table with mostly tight players, you can expect fewer multi-way pots and a slower tempo. Conversely, when loose players, especially those who are also aggressive, fill the table, the game becomes volatile. More raises and re-raises occur both before and after the flop. The key is to spot these archetypes as you play. Watch how often each player enters pots and how they size their bets. Are they driving the action, or are they waiting for someone else to make a move? Are they defending their blinds often, or folding them without a fight? The answers give you a map of the table dynamic in real time. Once you know the player types around you, you can start to predict how the game might shift. A tight player who loses a big pot might suddenly loosen up. An aggressive player who takes a hit might start playing more cautiously. These shifts do not always announce themselves. Sometimes they show up as small changes in bet size or timing. That is why ongoing observation matters. Each session you will see new combinations of styles, and each combination creates a unique table environment. Your job is to read that environment as it develops. Recognizing table dynamics is just the first step. You also need to adapt your play as those dynamics change. When the table gets more aggressive, tightening up your starting hand selection is often a reasonable response. You will want to be more careful about which pots you enter, and be ready to fold when you face heavy pressure with marginal hands. Adjusting your post-flop commitment threshold is important too. You might need to be more selective about how much you are willing to risk after the flop, especially if pots are getting bigger and opponents are playing back at you. In a very passive table setting, you can often take the opposite approach. Start entering more pots, especially when you have position. Look for spots to value bet thinner, since passive players are less likely to raise you off your hand. You can widen your range a bit, because the risk of facing big bets is lower. When you see that most players are content to call and check, you can take the lead more often and build your own pots with value hands. The most important thing is to stay flexible. Do not lock yourself into one style of play for the whole session. Each time you notice a change, maybe after a big pot, a seat change, or a new player joining, take a moment to reassess. Consider whether the table is more aggressive or more passive now. Are players taking more risks, or are they tightening up? Use this information to adjust your sense of risk and volatility. Sometimes this means playing fewer hands for a while. Other times it means loosening up and pressing your advantage. Notice how often players are entering pots and how they size their bets. That awareness helps you stay current with what the table is actually doing. When you get in the habit of reassessing after major confrontations or seat changes, you will be better prepared to keep your strategy in line with the current dynamic. Take a moment to slow down and notice how the table feels right now. Stay open to changes, even the small ones. The more you practice this kind of observation and flexibility, the easier it gets to stay one step ahead. Over time, your ability to read and adjust to what is happening around you can become one of the more reliable parts of your game. Chapter 10. Mastering the Meta Game. Your opponents are watching you. They're building a picture of how you play, what you bet with, and when you back down. And you're doing the same to them. The question isn't just what the right play is in this hand. It's what your opponent expects you to do, and whether you can stay one step ahead of that expectation. It is the strategic layer that comes into play when experienced players try to outthink each other, not just in one hand, but across many hands or even whole sessions. When you start considering how your table image affects what others expect from you, or how your betting patterns shape their decisions, you are engaging in this strategic dance. This layer tends to shift constantly. As you and your opponents gather new information about each other, strategies evolve. It's not about rigid rules or charts. It is about reading intentions, predicting adjustments, and choosing lines that exploit those tendencies. The more you understand this dynamic, the more often you will find spots where others are still playing one hand at a time, and you are thinking several moves ahead. To get good at this level of play, start by paying close attention to how your opponents actually play over time. Look for patterns, not just in the cards they show down, but in the way they approach the game. Notice how often a player raises before the flop. If someone is raising most hands, that tends to suggest a loose range. If they're raising infrequently and only in strong spots, they're likely playing tight. Watch how they size their bets across different streets. Some players like to use small bets to probe for information. Others prefer large bets to apply pressure or polarize their holdings. These habits can tell you a lot about their comfort with certain situations and their overall strategy. Do not ignore the timing of their actions. In live games, you might see a player act quickly when they are confident and take longer when they are unsure. Just remember, timing tells are not always reliable. They can sometimes be misleading, so it is best to use them alongside other information. The real value comes from noticing behaviors that repeat over many hands. For example, if a player consistently continuation bets after raising pre-flop, you can start to predict how they will approach future hands when they have the initiative. In tournament play, it helps to recall how opponents responded in similar spots earlier in the session. If someone tends to fold to aggression in key moments, that is something you can use later. The key is to build a picture of each opponent based on what they actually do, not just what happened in one unusual hand. Over time, this steady focus on patterns gives you much more reliable reads. Every table is different, and each player will have their own habits. The more patiently you track these tendencies, the better you become at anticipating their next move. Once you start recognizing these patterns, it is important to let your own strategy evolve in response. Strong players tend not to stick to one approach the whole session. They stay flexible and adjust as soon as they see the table shifting. For example, if you notice that your opponents are folding too often to your raises, it can make sense to widen your range and apply more pressure. If players are fighting back with frequent 3-bets, tightening your opening range is worth considering, so you're not caught with weaker hands in difficult spots. Sometimes you will notice opponents are check-raising more often after you continuation bet. In that case, you might want to check back more flops and avoid giving them easy spots to apply pressure. Bet sizing is another area where adaptation matters. If you think opponents have figured out how you size your value bets or bluffs, try mixing up your sizes with similar hand strengths. This makes it harder for them to read you and keeps your strategy unpredictable. There will be times when you have a reliable read that an opponent is especially vulnerable to a certain line. In those moments, it is fine to deviate from your default strategy and take an exploitative approach. This level of play is about balancing solid fundamentals with the willingness to change course when the situation calls for it. Over long stretches of play, you will see that strategies never stay in one place. Each adjustment you make can trigger new reactions from your opponents. You might find yourself cycling through different lines in similar spots, mixing bluffs, value bets, and checks, not because one is always right, but because staying unpredictable has its own value. This ongoing process of adjustment is often what distinguishes experienced players from those who rely on fixed tactics. It is not about being flashy or tricky every hand. It is about staying aware, responding to what you see, and refusing to become an easy target for opponents who are also paying attention. As you move forward, focus on how your choices fit into the bigger picture. With each session, you will get better at reading intentions, predicting changes, and adjusting on the fly. This awareness will guide your decisions and transform the strategic layer into an advantage you can use to shape your results. Embrace the challenge of spotting new patterns, and let each one deepen your understanding of the game. This is where deeper strategy lives, and where the real edge starts to grow. Chapter 11: Deception and Unpredictability. Your opponents are always building a picture of you. Every bet you make, every time you check, every time you fold, they are filing that information away and using it to predict what you will do next. In no-limit Texas Hold'em, this means taking actions that disguise your actual hand strength or your plan for the hand. When you weave deception into your game, you force your opponents to second-guess their reads. They can no longer rely on simple patterns or obvious tells. Instead, they have to operate with less certainty, which often leads them into mistakes over time. When someone faces an opponent who uses deception well, their decision-making tends to shift. They lose confidence in their reads and start to guess. That uncertainty creates real tension. Frustration tends to follow when someone cannot figure out what you are doing, and that frustration often leads to mistakes. In many live games, players who are known for mixing up their play tend to get more respect for their bets, even when they hold weaker hands. The possibility of deception expands the range of hands you might hold in any spot, making it much harder for others to pin you down. The real profit in deception comes from these psychological effects. When opponents start guessing, they are more likely to call when they should fold when they should call, or make emotional decisions that stray from good strategy. Over many hands, those small errors can add up meaningfully. That is why learning to use deception is a key step toward more advanced and profitable play. It is not just about tricking someone in a single pot. It is about shaping the whole table's perception and using that uncertainty to your advantage. One of the simplest ways to make this work is by varying your bet sizes in similar situations. If you tend to choose the same bet size with the same type of hand, attentive opponents are likely to catch on over time. Instead, try mixing in larger and smaller bets with both strong and medium strength hands. This keeps others from relying on your sizing as a clue to your cards. Changing your timing can also add complexity to your play. Sometimes, take more time to act with strong hands. Other times, act quickly with hands that are just average. This reduces the chance that someone picks up on your timing, tells. Mixing up how long you take, whether online or live, helps keep your actions less readable. Breaking up patterns by mixing in checks, bets, and raises with similar hand strengths is another effective strategy. If you consistently bet when you are strong and check when you are weak, observant opponents are likely to adjust. By occasionally checking with a strong but safe hand, or betting with a medium one, you introduce uncertainty. In tournaments, you might even check behind with a strong hand that is not vulnerable, just to keep future opponents guessing. Your pre-flop choices can further complicate your opponent's attempts to categorize your style. If you play tight for several orbits and then loosen up, it becomes harder for others to predict your approach. Rotating between tighter and looser, starting hand selections makes your overall strategy less predictable. Sometimes deviating from standard continuation bet frequencies can also keep your opponents on their toes. If you always bet when you are the pre-flop aggressor, observant opponents will catch on. By occasionally checking in spots where you could profitably bet, you keep them from making automatic assumptions about your play. The goal with all these adjustments is not to act randomly. It is to be intentionally elusive. Each action should make sense within your overall strategy. You want to build uncertainty for your opponents. Keep your own choices grounded in logic. There is a balance to strike here. If you use deception too often, you risk becoming predictable in your unpredictability. Players will start to see through the act if every hand is a tricky one. That is why it is important to mix in straightforward, value-driven actions as well. Sometimes just playing your strong hands in a simple way keeps your range balanced and your image credible. Overusing deception can make decisions harder for you too. You might find yourself in tough spots with marginal hands more often, and your results may swing more wildly from session to session. In tournaments, if you are always tricky, attentive opponents may start calling you down lighter, or looking for ways to attack your fancy moves. To stay in control, it helps to periodically reset your strategy. After a stretch of deceptive play, switch back to more transparent lines. This can reset expectations and make it harder for others to adjust. Reviewing your hands or mental notes after a session can help you spot when you have been leaning too far in one direction. Your frequency of deceptive moves should adjust based on how the table perceives you and the recent flow of the game, building on the table image and metagame concepts discussed in earlier chapters. If people are starting to call you down more often, it may be time to play more straightforwardly for a while. If you have been tight and predictable, it might be a good spot to introduce a few deceptive lines. As you refine your deceptive strategies, focus on how these psychological factors play out at your table. Each time you add a layer of uncertainty, observe the reactions of others. The true advantage lies in your ability to seamlessly integrate honesty and deception, using them as complementary tools. Mastering this balance will not only enhance your control over the game, but also make your strategy uniquely challenging for opponents to decipher. Chapter 12. Managing your bankroll wisely. Staying in the game long enough to improve is its own skill. The cards you hold matter far less than whether you still have chips to play when the right spot arrives. In cash games, this really comes down to aligning the stakes you play with the size of your poker bankroll and your own comfort with risk. The money you set aside for poker works best when it is completely separate from your living expenses. Treating it as a long-term commitment rather than a short-term gamble is what separates players who last from those who do not. Your bankroll serves two purposes at once. It is the resource you are trying to grow, and it is also the cushion that keeps you in the game when variance runs against you. Balancing those two pressures is where most of the real decisions happen. For most experienced players, this means making sure the risk of losing your entire bankroll stays low, even if it takes longer to climb the stakes. If your bankroll is much larger than the amount you buy in for, your chance of going broke drops over many sessions. That is why a lot of players choose to keep dozens of buy-ins for their usual game. The exact number depends on how much risk you are willing to take. If you are more cautious, you might want 50 or more buy-ins. If you are comfortable with bigger swings, you might settle for fewer. Setting clear limits is the next step. Decide the biggest stake you will play based on your bankroll size. This is your structural safeguard against making impulsive decisions. Some players use strict rules, like never sitting in a game where the buy-in is more than a certain percentage of their bankroll. Others adjust the number based on how well they handle swings. If you often find yourself uncomfortable during downswings, that is a sign you need a bigger cushion. When you ignore these limits, the risks get real. Chasing losses or taking shots in bigger games can lead to downswings that force you to drop stakes or even leave the game for a while. Players who stick to their limits tend to see more stable results. This discipline is not about playing scared. It is about giving yourself the best chance to stay in the game and keep building. Once you have set your limits, the goal is to hold to them. A single big win or a rough session is not a reason to change stakes. Let your bankroll and your risk tolerance set the pace rather than your emotions. Developing these habits makes your results more stable and your poker journey much smoother. Now let's talk about how to actually track and assess the risks to your bankroll. The first thing most experienced players do is figure out how many full buy-ins they have for their main game. For example, if you play 1-3 and buy in for $300, a bankroll of $15,000 gives you 50 buy-ins. This number is your main line of defense against variance. Tracking each session is another key habit. Keep a record of your starting bankroll, how much you buy in for, and how much you cash out. You can use a spreadsheet or a mobile app. This data shows you whether you are winning, losing, or just breaking even. It also helps you spot patterns, like whether you tend to lose more on certain days or in certain games. Many players apply a stop loss to each session. If you lose 3 buy-ins in a sitting, that is your signal to walk away. It keeps you from chasing losses and lets you come back with a clearer head next time. It is also important to compare your actual results with your historical win rate. If you are losing more often than usual, it could just be a downswing, or it could mean something has changed in your game or the player pool. Regular reviews help you catch these changes early. Adjusting your stakes is another part of risk assessment. As your bankroll grows or shrinks, check whether your current game still fits your risk profile. If your bankroll gets smaller, move down to a cheaper game before things get out of hand. If it grows, you can consider moving up, but only after making sure you are ready. Some players keep separate bankrolls for cash games and tournaments. This makes it clear how much risk you are taking in each format. If you play both, try not to mix the funds. It is easier to spot problems and stay disciplined this way. Game selection matters too. Tougher lineups tend to produce bigger swings and a smaller edge. If the games around you are getting harder, it is worth revisiting your bankroll requirements or considering a move down in stakes. Your playing style also comes into play. If you play a loose, aggressive style, expect bigger swings and plan your bankroll accordingly. Let's look at how this plays out over the long term. Imagine two players with the same card luck. One keeps 50 buy-ins for their main game and always follows a 3 buy-in stop loss. The other keeps only 5 buy-ins and is willing to risk it all in one night. The disciplined player is far more likely to still be in the game. The other is more likely to face a point where they have to drop down or step away entirely. Picture a player who moves up only after tracking consistent profits at a lower level. Their bankroll tends to grow more steadily. Compare that to someone who jumps up after one lucky streak. That player is more likely to hit a downswing their bankroll cannot absorb. As you gain experience, your bankroll needs might change. If you become a stronger player and the games are familiar, you might feel comfortable keeping fewer buy-ins. If you start playing tougher games, you might want a bigger cushion. Treat bankroll management as a living system that adapts as your skills and goals evolve. When you track your bankroll over tens of thousands of hands, you get a much clearer picture of what is sustainable. Short-term results can be misleading. Long-term data lets you see which stakes you can actually afford and when you are ready to take a shot at moving up. It is worth slowing down to notice how these habits shape your experience at the table. The more you respect your bankroll boundaries and assess your risk, the more likely you are to stay in the game and keep improving. Each decision you make with your bankroll in mind gives you another chance to play your best. Chapter 13. Adapting to online play. The screen in front of you replaces everything you'd normally sense at a live table. There's no one sitting across from you. You won't see faces to read, hear voices, or stack chips by hand. Hands come fast, and decisions happen with a click. The pace is much quicker than anything you'd experience in a live card room. You'll see many more hands each hour, which means more chances to win or lose in a shorter period of time. The swings in your bankroll can feel sharper because so much action happens in every session. In an online game, you're usually known only by a screen name. You don't know who the other players are, and they don't know you. There's no way to look for physical tells or to pick up on nervousness or confidence in someone's body language. That changes how you read your opponents. Pay close attention to how they bet and how quickly they make decisions. Betting patterns, bet sizes, and timing become your main clues. Over time, you start to notice who plays many hands, who folds quickly, and who takes a long time to act in key spots. This virtual setting also changes the psychology of the game. Without face-to-face interaction, it's easier to feel detached from the results. Wins and losses can feel less personal, but that distance can sometimes make it harder to notice when you're tilting or letting emotions creep into your decisions. You might play longer sessions or jump from table to table without much pause, because there's no physical space to leave or enter. The lineups change quickly. New players come and go with a few clicks, so you need to adapt to shifting table dynamics more often than in a live setting. To succeed online, it helps to build new habits for decision-making. The game moves quickly, and every hand comes with a timer. You'll have a set amount of time to act, sometimes with a time bank for tough spots. It's important to get comfortable making decisions efficiently. One way to do this is by using consistent pre-flop ranges and standard bet sizes. This reduces the mental effort needed for routine spots and frees up your attention for more complex decisions. The more you repeat these patterns, the easier it gets to act quickly without rushing or panicking. Almost every online site has features that help you keep up with the pace. You can use checkboxes to pre-select folding, checking, or calling before the action reaches you. This speeds up simple decisions and keeps the game moving. Many sites also let you take notes on opponents. Writing a quick note when someone does something unusual can help you remember their tendencies in future hands. Hand histories are recorded automatically. You can go back after the session and review what happened. This lets you study your play and spot mistakes or patterns you missed in real time. Since you can't see physical reactions, shift your attention to digital details. Watch how often a player raises before the flop, or how frequently they bet the flop after raising. Over a large enough sample of hands, these tendencies can start to reveal patterns in how someone plays. Timing can also be a clue. If someone acts instantly in some spots and tanks in others, that timing can tell you about their confidence or uncertainty in those moments. Building a habit of noting these patterns will help you form reads, even when you've never met your opponents. Discipline is even more important online than it is live. The quick pace makes it tempting to click call or raise without thinking things through. Try to pause for a second before every decision, even if the timer is running. Remind yourself to fold hands that aren't profitable, especially in marginal spots. Over the long run, letting go of weak hands quickly protects your bankroll and keeps you from making impulsive calls that add up to big losses. As you get comfortable with one table, you'll notice that many online players play several tables at the same time. This is called multi-tabling. You can arrange multiple tables on your screen so that every action box and bet button stays visible. The goal is to keep the most important information in view and avoid missing key decisions. Some players like to stack tables, while others tile them side by side. It's a matter of preference and what helps you stay organized. Playing more tables means you'll see even more hands per hour, but it also increases the mental load. Making more decisions, often with less time to think, can lead to decision fatigue if you're not careful. Many players find it helpful to start with 1 or 2 tables, then add more as they get comfortable. If you notice your focus slipping or your decisions getting rushed, it might be time to cut back or take a short break. Staying focused is a real challenge online. There are more distractions than in a live card room. Notifications from other apps, open browser windows, or even background noise can pull your attention away from the game. Turning off notifications and closing unrelated programs can help you keep your mind on the action. Scheduling regular short breaks gives your brain a chance to reset and helps you avoid mistakes caused by fatigue. If you play long sessions, these habits become even more important. When you play multiple tables, it's common to focus your attention on the biggest pots or the tables with unfamiliar opponents. If 2 or more decisions come at once, prioritize the spots with the most money at stake or where your edge is highest. Over time, you'll get better at tracking action across several games, but it takes practice. If you ever feel overwhelmed, Remember that playing fewer tables well tends to produce better results than spreading yourself too thin across many. The pace and shape of online poker are different from live play in almost every way. Adjust your habits, your focus, and your ways of reading opponents. The more you practice these adjustments, the smoother your sessions will feel. Each time you sit down, take a moment to settle in. Notice the rhythm of the tables, the flow of decisions, and the way your attention shifts from one screen to the next. The better you get at managing these details, the more comfortable and confident you'll feel in the online environment. The more you practice these adjustments, the more natural they'll feel. Give yourself time to settle into the rhythm. That patience is part of the skill. Chapter 14: Handling Tilt and Emotional Control. There's a moment most players recognize. The cards have gone cold, a hand you played well still lost, and something shifts inside you. The decisions that felt clear a few minutes ago start to feel harder to trust. This is where tilt takes hold. It often follows a string of bad beats, unexpected losses, or moments where the game feels unfair. Tilt can show up in different ways, but the most common sign is a shift in your play. You might start playing more hands than you normally would, calling or raising with weaker starting hands, or chasing after losses with bigger bets. The urge to get even can become stronger than your usual discipline. Once tilt sets in, your decisions become less about logic and more about emotion. This state can lead to impulsive choices and suboptimal play, which tend to hurt your results over time. Most players experience tilt at some point. Even experienced players aren't immune to it. The critical skill is learning to notice when it starts and taking steps to stop it before it does too much damage. If you let tilt run unchecked, you can lose the profits you worked hard to build, or even end up with long-term losses that are tough to recover from. Recognizing tilt early and understanding your own triggers is one of the most important skills for maintaining consistent performance in Texas Hold'em. Building emotional control isn't just about willpower. It is about building habits that help you notice when your mindset is shifting. Self-awareness is the first step. Sometimes you will notice physical cues before you even realize your mood has changed. Your heartbeat might speed up, your shoulders might tense, or you might feel restless in your seat. These are signs that you are reacting emotionally to what is happening at the table. When you notice these signals, it is important to pause before making your next decision. Some players will step away from the table for a few minutes, or even log off completely if they are playing online. These breaks can help you regain composure and return to the game with a clear mind. If you play extended periods, build in regular breaks to reduce mental fatigue. Tiredness makes it much harder to manage stress, and you are more likely to react emotionally if you are worn out. Another helpful habit is to keep a simple journal. After your games, jot down when you noticed tilt, what triggered it, and how you responded. Over time, you will start to see patterns in your own behavior. Maybe you are most vulnerable after a big loss, or when you feel you made a mistake. Knowing these triggers ahead of time makes it easier to catch yourself before tilt takes over. One of the clearest signs you're managing your emotions well is consistent decision-making. When you're sticking to your strategy, whether you're winning or losing, that's a good sign. When your choices start drifting from your usual approach, it's worth pausing to check in with yourself. Even a short break can help you reset before a costly mistake takes hold. Learning to manage your emotions is a skill that grows with practice. At first, you might only notice tilt after you have already acted on it. Over time, you will start to catch it earlier and make better choices in the heat of the moment. The more you practice these habits, the less power tilt will have over your game. Over many hands and games, emotional control becomes one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Players who master this area tend to make more consistent, rational decisions, even when things are not going their way. They are less likely to chase losses or throw away their strategy after a setback. This resilience helps them weather the natural ups and downs of the game without letting emotions dictate their actions. There's a strong connection between emotional discipline and long-term profitability. Tilt is widely considered one of the main reasons players lose money over time. When you avoid emotionally driven decisions, you protect your winnings and give yourself the best chance to grow as a player. Emotional resilience is often what separates strong players from the rest. It is not just about avoiding mistakes. It is about building the steadiness to keep making good choices, game after game, no matter what the cards bring. Let yourself notice how you feel during each session. Stay alert for the early signs of frustration or impatience. Give yourself permission to take a break or step away if you need to. These habits don't just protect your results today. They build the foundation for a long and successful journey in Texas Hold'em. Over time, emotional control will become a quiet strength that supports every part of your game. Chapter 15: Advanced Probability and Odds Calculation. Every decision at the table is a bet on something you cannot fully see. The cards coming next are unknown. What your opponents hold is a guess. What you do have is a way to measure how likely different outcomes are, and that measurement is what separates a reasoned choice from a hopeful one. Every time you look at your hand and the board, you are already working with probability, whether you realize it or not. It is not just about memorizing numbers. It is about using those numbers to guide your choices when you do not have all the answers. You have your cards in hand. You see the board. You can often make an educated guess about what your opponents might be holding. What you do not know is what cards are coming next, or exactly what everyone else is holding. That is where probability comes in. It lets you take what you know and estimate the chances of different outcomes. For example, the chance of being dealt any pocket pair before the flop is about 6%. That means if you sit and watch 100 hands, you will see a pocket pair about 6 times. If you do get a pocket pair, the chance of flopping a set or better is roughly 12%. That works out to about 1 time in every 8 tries. These numbers help you set your expectations and manage risk. As each new card comes out, the odds change. You update your estimates as you see more information. Probability does not give you a guarantee. It gives you a way to make decisions that are grounded in math instead of guesswork. When you get used to thinking in probabilities, you start to see the game differently. You stop hoping for specific cards and start weighing each choice by how likely it is to work out in your favor. The first step in any odds calculation is counting your outs. That number is the foundation everything else builds on. For example, if you are drawing to a straight with 4 connected cards, you count how many cards will finish that straight. That is your number of outs. In the case of an open-ended straight draw, there are 8 outs, because there are 4 cards at each end of your straight that can come on the next card. Once you know your outs, the next step is to turn that number into a probability. With 8 outs to an open-ended straight draw, your chance of hitting on the next card is about 17%. If you have a flush draw with 9 outs, your chance of hitting on the next card is about 19%. These are not just numbers to memorize. They let you compare your chances of improving to the cost of staying in the hand. This is where pot odds become the deciding factor. To find the break-even percentage for a call, you divide the amount you need to call by the total pot size after you call. Then you turn that into a percentage. If your chance of hitting your hand is higher than this percentage, calling is profitable over time. If it is lower, folding is usually the better choice. This basic math helps you avoid calls that cost you money across many hands. You can use these calculations on every street. Each time the action comes to you, the board has changed and the pot has grown. That means the math has changed too. If you miscount your outs or misjudge the size of the pot, you can end up making calls that seem reasonable in the moment. Over time, those calls cost you. There are 1,326 distinct starting hand combinations when order does not matter. That means every situation has its own set of probabilities and possible outcomes. If your math is off by even a few percentage points, it can tip a marginally profitable session into a losing one over enough hands. These errors do not just hurt you once. They repeat over time and start to shape your results for the worse. That is why being careful with your calculations is so important. Take the time to double-check your numbers, especially when you are learning or when the decision is close. The best players make a habit of reviewing their math away from the table. They practice, they run through examples, and they look for mistakes in their thinking. This is not just about speed. It is about building the kind of accuracy that lets you trust your decisions under pressure. When you get this right, you are giving yourself a real edge. You are letting the math work for you, not against you. There is always more to learn in this part of the game. As you get more comfortable with the basics, you can start digging deeper into more advanced calculations and concepts. For now, focus on being precise and methodical. Let yourself slow down and pay attention to the numbers in each hand. Practicing will make your decisions clearer. Over time, you will find that this approach not only improves your results, but also changes the way you see every situation at the table. Let these habits settle in and guide your play. The real strength in poker comes from making each decision with care and confidence, grounded in the math behind the game. Chapter 16: Psychological Warfare, Intimidation and Influence. Your presence at the table communicates something before you ever bet a chip. The way you sit, how you handle your chips, and how long you take to act all send signals. Opponents are reading those signals, whether you're aware of it or not. When you project confidence at the table, you send a signal that you are in control, whether or not you actually have the best hand. This confidence shows up in how you handle your chips, how you sit, and how you make decisions. Deliberate, unhurried movements and steady posture often give the impression of strength. Even your facial expression and breathing can help you appear composed under pressure. When you consistently show this kind of control, many opponents start to second-guess themselves. They may feel uncertain, hesitant, or even intimidated. In no-limit Texas Hold'em, this effect can be powerful. Some players will avoid confrontations with you, or fold hands that are actually quite strong, simply because you appear so sure of yourself. A large, unexpected overbet is a classic example of using psychological pressure. When you suddenly risk more chips than the pot holds, you force your opponent to make a difficult decision. Some opponents respond to this by folding, not because they're certain they're beaten, but because the pressure makes the decision feel too costly. You do not need to act aggressive or loud to be intimidating. Lasting table presence tends to come from quiet confidence and composure rather than volume or aggression. When you show that you are not rattled by big pots or tough decisions, you build an image that is hard to challenge. Over time, this kind of presence can shift how opponents approach you. Some may give up pots more readily. Others might call when raising would serve them better, or simply avoid situations where you're involved. Projecting strength is not just about winning a single hand. It is about shaping the whole flow of the game in your favor. Learning to read your opponents is just as important as projecting your own image. Every player reveals information through their body language, facial expressions, and betting rhythm. Watching for changes in posture or timing can give you clues about what someone is thinking. For example, a player who suddenly sits up straight or fiddles with their chips after a big bet might be feeling nervous. Sometimes, hesitation or a quick call can mean something specific, depending on the person and the context. Over many hands, patterns tend to emerge. You might notice that one player consistently glances toward their chips before committing to a strong hand. Another might take noticeably longer to act when they're not confident in their holding. These involuntary cues can sometimes reveal discomfort or confidence. To get the most value from these reads, you need to watch your opponents consistently. Do not just focus on one big hand or one obvious tell. Pay attention to how each player behaves across many situations. When you spot a deviation from their usual pattern, that is often when you can make the most informed decisions. Over time, these skills help you anticipate bluffs, spot strong hands, and choose your actions with greater confidence. Using psychological tactics at the table comes with real responsibility. There is a line between strategic influence and behavior that crosses into unfair or disrespectful territory. In poker, it is normal to use table presence, betting pressure, and controlled aggression to gain an edge. What is not acceptable is personal attacks, harassment, or anything that undermines the spirit of fair competition. Sportsmanship means you compete to win, but you do it with respect for everyone at the table. This includes treating opponents with courtesy, even when emotions run high or the stakes are big. In casino poker, there are clear rules about what is allowed. Floor staff have the authority to warn, penalize, or even remove someone who breaks these standards by angle shooting, harassing others, or violating house rules. The accepted norms of poker make it clear that skill and strategy are the tools for winning, not intimidation that becomes personal or hostile. When you use psychological tools, stay mindful of their impact. The goal is to influence decisions, not to make the game uncomfortable or unsafe for others. Strategic aggression is part of high-level play, but it works best when it stays within the boundaries of mutual respect. There's a real difference between pressure that tests an opponent's resolve and behavior that crosses into something personal or hostile. It's worth staying aware of that line as the game heats up. The strongest players use their mental game to compete fiercely, but they do not lose sight of the bigger picture. Confidence and sharp observation will take you far. So will knowing where the line is. The players who last longest at high-level games tend to compete hard without making the table a place people want to leave. Chapter 17. Building and maintaining a table image. Every hand you play leaves a trace in your opponent's minds. In No Limit Texas Hold'em, this impression comes from your visible actions. The hands you choose to play, how much you bet, how often you raise, and how you act at showdown all contribute. In live games, even your posture, how you stack chips, and your eye contact matter. Online, your timing and bet sizes take the lead. Every choice you make shapes the narrative your opponents build about you. Perception is not just background noise, it has a real impact on the decisions others make against you. Opponents who see you as very tight will often fold more to your bets. Those who think you're loose are more likely to call you down lighter or look for spots to trap you. When your table image is clear and consistent, predicting how others will react to your actions becomes easier. You can influence the flow of hands in ways that favor your plan. Over time, as you build and adjust your image, steering opponents into making mistakes becomes possible. Sometimes they fold too much, giving up pots you did not really earn. Other times they call when they should not, paying you off when you have the goods. A well-managed table image can be one of the more powerful tools available for shaping how hands play out. Your table image doesn't stay fixed. It's always evolving. The more hands you play, the more data your opponents gather. Changing your style, getting involved in big pots, or showing down surprising hands will lead people to update their views. In tournaments, things shift even faster. Stack sizes, blind levels, and recent action all play a part. Even if your core strategy stays the same, how others see you can shift from one orbit to the next. Staying aware of this evolution tends to help you keep your edge. Most players fall into recognizable table image types. The tight aggressive player is seen as someone who doesn't enter many pots, but plays firmly and with purpose when they do. Opponents tend to give this player respect, folding weaker hands and avoiding marginal spots. Building this image allows you to sometimes get away with more bluffs, because people expect you to have it. The loose, aggressive player takes the opposite approach. They're in a lot of pots, betting and raising often, and putting pressure on others. Opponents may get fed up and start calling lighter or fighting back with marginal hands. The loose, aggressive style works well when you want to build big pots, push players out, or force mistakes from those who get impatient or tilt-prone. It can also create future payoffs. Suddenly tightening up after a period of wild play might get you called down by players who think you are still bluffing. A passive table image has its own uses. This player calls frequently, but rarely applies pressure. In cash games and tournaments, a passive player who suddenly shows aggression is often believed to have a very strong hand. This can help you get paid when you finally do wake up with a monster, or it can keep you from getting bluffed as often. Sometimes a passive image is useful when you want to fly under the radar and let others battle while you wait for premium spots. Choosing the right table image depends on your opponents and the environment. In some games, being tight aggressive is the most profitable, because players pay attention and fold when they should. Other times, a loose aggressive approach lets you exploit passive, risk-averse tables. The key is to read the room and align your image with your overall plan. Successful players also know when to shift gears. Once everyone has adjusted to your tightness, you can open up. If your loose play is getting too much attention, it may be time to rein things in. Building a table image starts with consistency. To be seen as tight, fold weaker hands, choose strong starting hands, and show down solid holdings when you get called. Your bet sizes, timing, and physical habits should all match the story you want to tell. For a loose image, get involved in more pots, vary your hands, and keep up the pressure. In live games, even how you handle your chips and how you act between hands will reinforce your chosen persona. Online, stick to similar timing patterns and bet structures in similar spots. The real challenge is maintaining your image as the session goes on. People are always watching for contradictions. Known as a rock, but suddenly three-betting with a wild hand, attentive players will notice. Sometimes you can use these contradictions to your advantage, setting up future traps or confusing the table. Still, for most of your session, you want your actions to back up your image. Credibility builds, making your future bluffs or value bets more effective. At some point, opponents will start to adjust. Aggressive play may lead them to call you down lighter. A tight approach might cause them to fold more. When you sense this shift, it is time to adapt. The best way is usually gradual. Change your hand selection a bit. Ease up or ramp up your aggression by small amounts. Sudden, drastic changes can draw attention and break the spell. Smooth transitions keep you one step ahead. Managing a table image is not just about tactics. It is a psychological task as well. Holding a consistent persona for hours demands emotional control and self-awareness. Monitoring your own state and staying aware of how others are likely reading you is crucial. This can be draining, especially when variance hits or the environment gets tense. With practice, it tends to get easier to hold your image steady and make small shifts when needed. Picture the subtle ways your image shapes each decision at the table. Observe how your opponents respond and be ready to adjust. The real strength of a table image lies in your ability to adapt and evolve as the game changes around you. Chapter 19: Spotting and Exploiting Weaknesses. Quiet attention is where it all begins. Every hand gives you a new chance to track how players respond when a decision is in front of them. You want to notice not just the big moves, but the small patterns that repeat gradually. Watch for players who check often on the flop, turn, and river. When someone keeps checking in spots where a bet might make sense, it can hint at caution or uncertainty. Sometimes it might mean they're slow playing a strong hand, but frequent checks can often suggest a player who isn't confident enough to bet for value or protection. Another pattern to watch is repeated calling without raising. If a player often just calls bets across multiple streets, that usually means they're playing passively. A passive style tends to rely more on making hands than on putting pressure on others. This is especially clear in players who call pre-flop and then check or call small bets after the flop. As you observe, you'll see that these players rarely raise unless their hand is very strong. That makes their range easier to read and their play more predictable. Timing is another clue you can use. In live games, long pauses before checking or calling often reveal indecision. The player isn't sure if their hand is good enough to bet, so they hesitate and then take the safer option. In online games, you might see the opposite. Sometimes, players call very quickly on the flop or turn. Fast calls can mean a weak hand or a draw, but they can also just be a personal habit. You'll learn more by noticing if this behavior repeats in the same spots. When you see an opponent only betting big with obviously strong hands, that's another form of weakness. Their range is face up, so you know they rarely bluff or value bet thinly. If you keep track of how often someone checks instead of betting, you can start to build a sense of who is risk-averse and who is willing to take chances. Gradually, these small observations add up. You'll start to see which players are confident and which ones are playing not to lose. Once you spot these weaknesses, you can adjust your own strategy to take advantage. Against players who check often, increase your post-flop bet frequency. A lot of pots can go uncontested when you bet into someone who isn't willing to fight back without a strong hand. This approach tends to work best when you've noticed the pattern across many hands and feel reasonably confident in your read. If you see that someone calls small bets but folds to bigger ones, try increasing your bet size on later streets. Larger bets tend to put more pressure on players who don't like risking chips without a strong holding. When you face opponents who check and call but rarely raise, you can look to continuation bet more often. They'll tend to let you control the action, and push back mainly when they've made a very strong hand. For players who call too often, value bet thinner. You don't need advanced bluffing here. Just bet your medium strength hands for value more often, since they're more likely to call with worse. On the other hand, if someone never folds, don't waste chips on bluffs. Focus on building pots when you're ahead and avoid trying to push them off hands. Sometimes, you'll want to test a hesitant opponent by betting small on earlier streets. This lets you see how they respond without risking much. If they keep folding to small pressure, you can keep increasing the frequency and size of your bets. Position also matters. Play more pots in position against passive callers, where you can control the flow and gather more information before making big decisions. As you exploit these weaknesses, it's important not to become predictable yourself. Mix up your bet sizes and timing. Occasionally check back strong hands, especially against players who fold to aggression. This can induce them to bet weaker holdings, or call more often later. Just be careful, because against very passive players, checking strong hands can mean missing value if they won't bet for you. Vary your lines with similar strength hands against the same opponent. Sometimes bet, sometimes check, and sometimes shift your approach on a later street. This keeps your play from becoming a script your opponents can read. If you're not sure your read is strong enough, choose a pot control line. Bet smaller, check more often, and avoid overcommitting until you have more information. As you keep playing, focus on turning your reads into profit without overreaching. If you know an opponent folds too much, size your bets to take advantage, but don't risk your whole stack on a single read. With calling stations, value bet more often, but avoid betting so big that you only get called by hands that beat you. If you're facing someone unpredictable, sometimes it's better to pass on a marginal spot and wait for a clearer opportunity. You're not just playing your cards, but also your opponent's tendencies. Keep detailed notes, mental or written, about how each player responds to different bet sizes and lines. This information becomes more valuable as you see the same players session after session. Sometimes you'll need to change your usual response in a spot where an opponent expects a certain reaction. This small adjustment keeps them guessing and prevents them from turning your habits against you. Make time to review hands where you targeted a weakness, but didn't win. That's how you refine your sense of which patterns are genuinely profitable and which ones might be leading you in the wrong direction. With disciplined attention to these details, you'll spot new weaknesses, adjust your strategy, and keep your approach profitable. The key is to exploit these insights actively and let them guide your strategic adjustments. The more you practice, the more naturally these skills will shape your decisions and your results, turning reads into real lasting profit. Chapter 19: The End Game, Closing Out Successfully. Your stack tells a story at this point in the session. Its size shapes how much pressure you can create and how much you can absorb from others. When you are holding a lead, every decision you make with your chips matters more. A strong stack lets you apply pressure and force mistakes. It also brings new risks if you get careless. Preserving your lead while using it as a tool requires choosing your spots to bet and raise thoughtfully. Don't act simply because you feel in control. Overextending can lead to losing the advantage you have built. Becoming too passive allows others to catch up or push you off pots. Leverage your chips by making bets that put opponents in tough spots and force them to make errors. Psychological pressure plays a significant role in how these final stages unfold. The stakes feel higher, and every pot can swing the session. Fear of losing your lead can creep in, making you play too tight or second-guess yourself. Overconfidence can be just as dangerous, often leading to careless bluffs or loose calls. Both of these mindsets can cloud your judgment and push you away from optimal decisions. Handling the stress effectively involves anchoring yourself in deliberate, measured actions. Take an extra breath before each big decision. Remind yourself that every chip has value and that one hand will not define your whole session. Staying disciplined means sticking to your plan when things are going well, but also knowing when to slow down if you feel yourself getting emotional or distracted. In these high-pressure moments, maintaining focus is crucial. Watch the table closely. Keep track of stack sizes. Stay aware of how your opponents are reacting to the changing situation. If you notice yourself getting impatient or tense, pause and reset your attention. The more you can stay in the present, the less likely you are to make costly mistakes. As the game nears its end, the behavior of your opponents often shifts. Players who are tight might start chasing, hoping to recover losses. Others might tighten up, protecting what they have left. Pay close attention to these changes. Look for new betting patterns. Notice hesitation or sudden aggression. Each of these signals can give you clues about how an opponent is feeling and what they might be holding. Reading opponents in these final stages is about more than just watching for tells. Observe how their ranges change as stacks shrink or grow, and how their bet sizing adapts under pressure. If someone starts betting larger or smaller than usual, ask yourself what has changed. Are they trying to protect a lead, or are they taking desperate shots? Each adjustment in their behavior is an opportunity for you to respond in kind. Adaptability tends to be one of your most valuable tools at this stage. These final stages are not the time for a fixed plan. If you tend to attack with the same hands or respond the same way to pressure, attentive opponents are likely to catch on and adjust. Instead, remain unpredictable. Adjust your bet sizes and how often you bet. Sometimes it's worth slowing down and letting others make mistakes. Other times, increasing your aggression makes more sense when you sense hesitation. Table dynamics shift quickly as the game winds down. A player who just lost a big pot may start tilting, making decisions driven more by frustration than by sound reasoning. Another may suddenly start folding everything, waiting for a perfect spot. Your job is to stay alert to these shifts and adapt your approach. If you spot a player who is now playing scared, you can widen your range and steal more pots. If someone is steaming, you can tighten up and let them hang themselves with aggressive mistakes. As you make decisions, keep in mind that each choice is a balance of risk and reward. With a lead, you have the option to pressure others, but you also want to avoid unnecessary risks that could cost you the session. Weigh your options by thinking about both the immediate gain and the long-term picture. Expected value represents the average outcome of a decision if it were made repeatedly under the same conditions. Even in high-pressure spots, you want your choices to be grounded in this kind of thinking. Aggression has its place in these final stages, but so does caution. If you sense that an opponent is about to push back hard, do not be afraid to step back and let them make the first move. On the other hand, if you notice hesitation, that can be a reasonable moment to increase your aggression. It's crucial to assess each situation for what it is, not for what you hope it will be. Anticipating your opponent's responses is a core part of this process. When you make a bet, think ahead to how others are likely to react. Are they likely to fold, call, or raise? What will you do if the hand takes an unexpected turn? Planning your next step before you act makes your decisions clearer and helps you stay ahead of the action. Pot odds and equity still matter, especially as pots grow larger. When you're facing a big decision, the math you've been applying throughout the session doesn't change. If the numbers line up, proceeding is generally the stronger choice. If not, do not be afraid to let go and wait for a better spot. In the final moments, your ability to close out the game comes down to clarity and confidence. Trust your reads, respond to new information, and do not let the pressure push you into rushed decisions. Each action should have a purpose. Whether you're applying pressure or stepping back to protect your chips, that purpose should be clear before you act. These final decisions are calculated choices. Each one builds on the last. As you navigate these concluding moments, focus on the rhythm of the table. The more you notice, the easier it becomes to make steady, profitable decisions. Each session offers a unique opportunity to refine your approach and sharpen your skills for closing out a game with precision and insight. Chapter 20: Dealing with Variance and Downswings. In poker, short-term results often diverge from the quality of your decisions. That gap between effort and outcome is not a flaw in the game. It is simply how the game works. In No Limit Texas Hold'em, every session brings a mix of wins and losses that do not always match the quality of your decisions. This holds for cash games and tournaments alike, though the swings can feel sharper in tournament play. The reason is simple. Poker runs on random card distribution and all-in confrontations. Sometimes weaker hands win, sometimes stronger hands lose, and over a small number of hands, the results can look almost random. These swings follow a predictable pattern, even when they do not feel that way. If you play sound, strategic poker over a large enough sample, your results tend to move closer to reflecting your actual skill level. But over a short stretch, a few sessions, or even a few weeks, variance can make a losing player look like a winner, and a skilled player look like they are playing badly. In tournaments, the effect is often stronger because only a handful of top finishes pay out, so most well-played events end without a cash. When you look at your results after just a short run, it is easy to feel like you are either better or worse than you really are. This is why it is so important to recognize variance as a neutral part of the game. It is not a sign that something is wrong, and it is not something you can control. The only thing you can control is your approach and your mindset. Holding on to this perspective helps you avoid the trap of overreacting to short-term streaks. If you understand that variance is always present, you can step back from a bad run and see it for what it is, a temporary swing, not a judgment on your ability. This steadiness is what lets you keep improving, even when the cards are not falling your way. When the swings turn negative, the emotional side of the game becomes harder to manage. Downswings can feel like a personal attack, even though they are just part of the game's natural flow. It is common to feel frustration or self-doubt when the losses pile up, especially if you know you are making good decisions but still cannot seem to win. These feelings are normal. They are also dangerous if you let them shape your play. One of the biggest risks during a downswing is falling into tilt. That emotional override pulls you away from your strategy and toward impulsive decisions you would not normally make. Instead of playing your usual game, you might chase losses, take bigger risks, or make impulsive calls and bluffs that you would never try on a good day. This is how a bad run can turn into something much worse. Another pattern that shows up during losing streaks is results-oriented thinking. It pulls your attention away from decision quality and toward outcomes you cannot fully control. This is a trap. Poker is a game of decisions, not immediate results. What matters is that you keep making the best possible choices, hand after hand, and let the long-term edge work itself out. When you notice frustration building, or see yourself slipping into desperation, it is time to slow down. Remind yourself that variance is not personal. It does not respond to how well you played last hand or last month. Your job is to keep your focus on the journey, not the outcome. This is where emotional discipline matters most. The players who tend to last in poker are not the ones who avoid losses. They are the ones who keep thinking clearly when the losses come. There are practical steps you can take to protect yourself during a downswing. One of the simplest is to tighten up your hand selection before the flop. By playing fewer hands, you limit the number of tough spots where small mistakes can add up. This does not mean you abandon your core strategy or become passive. It just means you give yourself fewer chances to get caught in marginal situations where variance can hit hardest. At the same time, put extra attention on the fundamentals. Focus on your position at the table, your bet sizing, and the range of hands you and your opponents are likely to have. These basics do not change just because you are losing. In fact, they become even more important. When you stick to the core principles of the game, you give yourself the best chance to ride out the rough patches without making things worse. It can also help to reduce the number of thin bluffs or marginal hero calls you make. When you are running badly, the temptation is to force the action or try to win pots you would normally let go. This tends to work against you more often than not. Instead, rely on your strategy and wait for the right spots. Let patience be your guide. If you need more time with each decision, take it. Slowing down helps you reconnect with your normal thought process and keeps you from reacting out of frustration or fear. Reviewing key hands away from the table is another habit that can help. When you look back at your decisions with a clear head, you can separate the times when variance beat you from the times when you made a real mistake. This prevents you from overcorrecting or throwing out strategies that are still fundamentally sound. Above all, keep folding hands you know are dominated, even if you are on a losing streak. Do not let the urge to chase or double up push you into spots you would normally avoid. Self-control in these moments is what sets steady players apart from those who let variance dictate their strategy. The truth is, you cannot control when the cards turn cold or the pots run against you. What you can control is how you respond. Every downswing is a test of patience, self-control, and trust in your approach. If you keep your focus on decision quality and game fundamentals, you give yourself the best chance to come out the other side, ready for the next upswing. This mindset takes time to build. Each session is a new opportunity to practice self-control and patience, even when things are not going your way. The steadier you are in the face of variance, the stronger your foundation will be for the deeper strategic work ahead. Over time, this approach becomes a quiet strength that keeps your game moving forward, no matter what the short-term results look like. Chapter 21: Continuous Improvement and Learning. There's a version of this game where you study hard for a few months, feel like you've figured it out, and then stop. That version tends to plateau. The players who keep getting better treat skill as something that's always in progress, not something you finish. Instead, they build habits that keep them improving year after year. In No Limit Texas Hold'em, this means looking back at your sessions and searching for spots where your thinking was clear, as well as those that left you guessing. Every player faces 1,326 distinct starting hand combinations across a session, and the decisions in each session add up fast. Without regular review, it is easy to miss patterns in your choices, or let the same mistakes repeat. One of the most useful habits is to review hand histories soon after you finish playing. When you go back over your decisions, You start to see which types of spots feel comfortable and which ones remain confusing. If you keep written notes after each session, you can track changes in your play and spot leaks that show up again and again. Many experienced players notice that certain mistakes in pre-flop and flop play keep coming up until they are addressed directly. Over time, tracking your thoughts and results in a structured way helps you see real progress and shows you where you still need to grow. Honest self-assessment is important for everyone, no matter how long you have played. Even experienced players can hit plateaus or fall into predictable habits if they stop reflecting on their games. A routine for reviewing and recording your results encourages you to face your weaknesses and recognize your strengths. This kind of openness makes it easier to adjust your strategy as the game changes. Poker is not static. The player pool, popular tactics, and even the way hands are played will shift over time. There is no shortage of resources available if you want to keep improving. Many players start with classic strategy books that break down core ideas like position, bet sizing, and hand ranges. Books give you a foundation to build on, but the learning does not stop there. Online training platforms now offer courses, quizzes, and example scenarios that you can work through at your own pace. These sites often include hand breakdowns and real-time commentaries, so you can see how experienced players approach tough spots and think through their options. Community forums and discussion groups are another useful resource. In these spaces, you can share hand histories, ask questions, and get feedback from players at your level or above. A single outside perspective can highlight a pattern you missed. It can also suggest a new way to look at a familiar situation. Watching training videos or live play commentaries lets you observe the decision process of strong players as it happens. This gives you practical examples of how theoretical ideas play out at the table. As you use these resources, it helps to focus on reputable sources and communities that encourage thoughtful discussion. Poker strategy changes over time, and what works now may not be as effective a year from today. Sampling a mix of books, online courses, and peer feedback exposes you to a wider range of ideas. It also helps you avoid getting locked into a single way of thinking. Practice is where everything comes together. Study alone tends not to be enough. Regular time at the table helps you test new concepts and reinforce your understanding. Lineups change, opponents adjust, and stack sizes shift from hand to hand. Staying flexible as you gather new information is part of what keeps your game moving forward. Many players find it helpful to try out new ideas in lower stakes games or less pressured settings. This gives you space to experiment without risking significant losses. As you get comfortable with a new approach, you can bring it into higher stakes or more competitive games. The willingness to adapt is what separates players who plateau from those who keep improving. Each session is a chance to learn something new, whether it is from a mistake, a successful adjustment, or an unexpected situation. When you make a habit of reviewing, studying, and practicing with intention, you build a foundation for steady progress. The real edge comes from staying curious, open, and ready to learn, no matter how much experience you have. The small changes that show up when you pay attention are easy to miss in the moment. Over time, they're the ones that matter most. Growth in poker is not about big leaps. It is about steady, thoughtful steps forward, session by session. If you keep that commitment, you're likely to find your game getting stronger and your results more consistent over time. Chapter 22: Leveraging Technology and Tools. The gap between players who study with software and those who don't has grown wider every year. Many of the strongest players today aren't relying on instinct or memory alone. They are using software tools that give them detailed information and support smarter decisions. When you start using these tools, you're no longer relying purely on guesswork. You're working with real data and strategy models that can help you spot mistakes and find better lines. For serious online players, there are two main kinds of software you will see most often. The first is the heads-up display. It sits on your screen during play and shows you statistics about your opponents in real time. Those numbers come from all the hands you've played against them, building a profile that goes well beyond what you can hold in memory. You might see how often someone puts money in the pot before the flop, how often they raise before the flop, how aggressive they are after the flop, or how often they fold to a continuation bet. With these numbers, you can quickly notice if someone is playing too many hands, not raising enough, or just being too passive. That helps you adjust your strategy on the fly and target weaknesses you might have missed otherwise. The second major tool is the solver. You don't use it during live play. Instead, you bring it into your study sessions away from the table. It models the possible actions in a hand and runs calculations based on game theory. The output tells you how often you'd want to bet, call, or fold with different hands in a given spot. You can use a solver to look at specific situations that gave you trouble and see what the theory says about the best approach. Across many sessions, this kind of study helps you build a stronger understanding of balanced play and teaches you how to avoid tendencies that opponents could exploit. There's also hand-reading software, which works a little differently. You input the actions your opponent took, and it builds a model of what hands they're likely to have. It's useful for training yourself to think in ranges, rather than fixating on individual hands. Most serious players also keep a hand history database, where every hand gets stored for later review. By looking back at thousands of hands, you can identify weaknesses in your own game and find trends in how others play against you. When you combine all these tools, you get a much clearer picture of both your own tendencies and those of your opponents. Once you have these tools set up, the real work starts with data analysis. The process usually begins by reviewing your past hands, either right after a session or in regular study blocks. You look for spots where you felt unsure or where the outcome surprised you. By comparing your actual decisions with what the data shows about opponent tendencies and range assumptions, you start to see where things went right or wrong. Often this means looking at how your decisions stack up against what the solver would recommend, or what the numbers in your HUD suggest about an opponent's habits. A big benefit of this process is being able to measure your results in a way that goes beyond just wins and losses. One common method is to track your win rate in big blinds per 100 hands. This helps you see how you are doing across different stakes and sessions, even if the results swing up and down from day to day. More importantly, reviewing lots of hands as your sample grows lets you identify recurring weaknesses in your play. Maybe you are calling too often in certain spots or missing value with strong hands. Sometimes you will also notice trends in your opponent's play that you can exploit next time. When you use data like this, you are not just reacting to what happens in a single hand. You are building a long-term strategy that adapts as you learn more. Another key part of data analysis is using statistical breakdowns to compare your habits with those of winning players. You might notice that your aggression frequency is lower than it should be, or that you fold too often to certain bets. These trends are hard to spot in real time, but they show up clearly when you look at the numbers with consistent practice. By setting up regular review sessions, you give yourself a chance to catch these weaknesses and make steady improvements. With consistent practice, this habit makes your strategy more precise and less vulnerable to common mistakes. As technology becomes more advanced, the line between fair advantage and unfair play gets more attention. There are real ethical questions about how and when to use these tools. Most online poker sites and live tournaments have strict rules about what is allowed. For example, solver software is meant for study and preparation, not for use during an active hand or session. Using a solver to get real-time advice while you play is treated as cheating by most platforms and can lead to serious penalties. The same applies to certain real-time HUDs, which several major online platforms have banned or restricted because they can give experienced players a significant edge over recreational ones. It's your responsibility to know the rules for the sites and tournaments where you play. If you're not sure whether a tool is allowed, check the guidelines before using it. The spirit of fair play matters just as much as any technical edge. Poker is built on competition, skill, and respect for the rules. When you use technology responsibly, you help keep the game fair for everyone and protect your own reputation. There is an ongoing debate about where to draw the line between legitimate study and unfair real-time assistance. Some people believe that any tool used during play is too much, while others think certain aids are part of the natural evolution of the game. What matters most is that you understand both the capabilities and the limits of the tools you use, and that you always play within the rules set by the site or tournament. As you refine your skills with these tools and analyses, remember that the real edge comes from combining careful analysis with the discipline to use technology wisely. This mindset is what enhances your strategy and keeps you competitive in the game. Chapter 23: Staying ahead of the curve. Adaptability tends to be one of the most reliable traits among players who sustain success over the long run. The game rarely stands still. You will see table lineups change, popular bet sizes shift, and the way players approach pre-flop hands evolve over months and years. In both live cash games and tournaments, what works today might not work tomorrow. Players who stick to one fixed style can become more predictable over time as observant opponents start to catch on. When you're rigid in your decisions, observant opponents will start finding ways to exploit you session after session. Flexible thinking helps you respond to new tactics and shifting dynamics. You might notice players defending their blinds more often. You might see the whole table shift toward larger pre-flop raises. Sometimes the broader strategic environment shifts, and concepts like continuation betting frequency or value-to-bluff ratios need to be reconsidered. If you are not willing to recalibrate your strategy, you risk falling behind the curve. In tournaments, stack depths and payout structures can vary so much that a single fixed strategy is unlikely to cover every spot. Players who adapt to these shifts tend to maintain their edge, while those who don't often find themselves falling behind. Being adaptable also means staying open to learning. Every session is a chance to notice something new about how the overall player pool is changing. By regularly reviewing these trends, you avoid the trap of stagnation and find new opportunities to get ahead. There are several practical ways to stay ahead of trends in poker. Start by analyzing game dynamics at your table. Notice how often pots go multi-way, what the typical pre-flop raise sizes are, and how frequently players defend their blinds or 3-bet. These patterns can shift over time, and paying attention to them helps you spot when your old habits might need updating. Observing player behavior is another key method. Take note of which starting hands opponents show down from each position. Over many hands, you will see who is entering too many pots from early position and who is sticking to stronger ranges. Experienced players also track which opponents are bluffing in large pots, and how often. These habits let you detect when bluffing tendencies are changing in the player pool. Incorporating new strategies is about more than just reading the latest article or watching a video. Test changes in low-risk spots before bringing them into major pots. You might try out different bet sizes, shift your bluff frequency, or expand your value range for a few orbits. If you notice positive results, keep refining those changes. If not, review what happened and decide whether to continue or move on. It helps to compare your own patterns to current strategy material every so often. This kind of honest review can reveal leaks or outdated habits that you might not have noticed on your own. In tournaments, track how the average aggression level at your table changes as the blinds go up. If you are the only one still playing tight while everyone else has shifted gears, your strategy could be out of sync with the field. The willingness to experiment, observe, and adjust is what keeps your edge as the game evolves. Foresight is what ties all these habits together. It is about projecting how others will react to your choices, not just on the current street but on future streets as well. Before you commit chips, think ahead to how your opponents might respond. Are they likely to widen their ranges after winning a few pots in a row? Could changing stack sizes or antes in a tournament alter their opening and shoving ranges soon? The more you study these patterns, the better you become at anticipating what comes next. Players with strong foresight do not just react to what is in front of them. They map out likely turn and river scenarios when facing a flop decision. They plan for future runouts and see which cards will favor their range versus an opponent's. When you sense that your lines have become too obvious, you can plan to shift your approach several orbits ahead. This kind of forward thinking helps you stay unpredictable and one step ahead of observant opponents. Sustained success in poker often comes down to the ability to see when a commonly used strategy is becoming overused and therefore more exploitable. If you notice the player pool is relying too much on a certain bet size or a specific pre-flop range, that is the moment to start planning your counter. The players who spot these shifts early and adjust their own tendencies are the ones who maintain their success even as the game changes around them. Take a moment to notice what's actually changing at your tables. The more you practice adaptability, the easier it becomes to spot new trends and act before others catch on. Stay open to learning, keep reviewing your own habits, and let your foresight guide you. Over time, these skills will make you comfortable with change and ready to lead the curve instead of chasing it.